Back in the mid-1960s, a creative battle was fought across the Atlantic. And this wasn't with armies, but with harmonies and tape machines. It was this incredible rivalry between the two biggest bands in the world, and it completely pushed pop music into the realm of high art. It changed what an album could even be. So today, we're diving into that legendary duel between the Beatles and the Beach Boys.
And it all started right here, with this one sentence. It was just a thunderbolt of inspiration, a bold declaration from Brian Wilson, the genius behind the Beach Boys. And what caused it? An album he just heard by the Beatles. And just like that, with that one thought, a chain of events was set in motion that would give us some of the most incredible music of the entire 20th century.
Now, to really get how revolutionary this all was, you have to picture the music world back in 1965. See, back then, singles were king. That's all that mattered. Albums, they were mostly just an afterthought, really. You'd get a couple of hit songs, and then the rest was just padded out with filler tracks to sell a record. Nobody thought of them as, a complete artistic statement. But that was all about to change.
And here's the wild paradox both of these bands were living in. You had the Beatles, the world's lovable mop-tops, totally trapped by the screaming crowds at Beatlemania. And then you had the Beach Boys, who were the sound of an endless summer, all sun, surf, and cars. I mean, both bands were at the absolute peak of their fame, but at the same time, they both felt creatively stuck, just desperate to break out of the very formulas that had made them so huge.
So, the first shot in this creative war? It was fired in December 1965. The Beatles released Rubber Soul, and it was this really conscious, deliberate step away from just being pop stars and a move toward being artists in the studio. Their own producer, the legendary George Martin, even said it was the very first time they thought of an album as a whole, as a single work of art.
And their new approach? It was all about sound. They started using the recording studio like it was its own instrument. You had George Harrison bringing the sitar to Western pop music on Norwegian wood. They were using a gritty, distorted fuzz bass, a reedy harmonium, and for the song In My Life, they did something amazing. They recorded a piano solo at half speed, then sped up the tape to create this beautiful, sparkling sound that almost sounds like a harpsichord. This wasn't just recording songs anymore. This was building entire worlds out of sound.
But it wasn't just the music that was maturing. Oh no. They were listening to a lot of Bob Dylan, and their lyrics just took this massive leap forward. Gone were the days of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Instead, you got these complex, veiled stories about affairs in Norwegian wood, or this really stark self-reflection in Nowhere Man, and of course that beautiful, bittersweet nostalgia in My Life. They were suddenly writing about adult life, with all its messiness and all its gray areas.
Okay, but here's the absolute twist of fate in this whole story. Brian Wilson never even heard the album that the Beatles actually intended to make. See, in the US, their record label, Capitol, completely reshuffled the track list. They cut 4 of the more rockin' songs and added in 2 softer, more acoustic tracks. And the result, completely by accident, was this much more cohesive, intimate folk rock album. And that album, that accidental album, was the one that lit a fire under Brian Wilson.
So after hearing what he thought was his perfect, seamless album, Brian Wilson decided he had to top it. His response would be nothing short of revolutionary. He stopped touring with the band and just dedicated himself completely to one singular, all-consuming vision, creating his masterpiece.
And Wilson's whole approach was completely different from the Beatles' collaborative vibe. He was a true architect of sound. He would literally hear the entire sonic landscape in his head, and then he'd hire LA's absolute best session musicians, the legendary Wrecking Crew, to build his intricate arrangements, layer by tiny layer. The other Beach Boys, they would come in much, much later, just to add their famous vocal harmonies on top of this creation that was already basically finished.
And just look at the toolbox he was using. I mean, while the Beatles were experimenting, Wilson was inventing an entirely new sonic language. We're talking French horns and string sections right next to the eerie wail of an electro-theremin. But it went even further than that. He started bringing in found sounds, the everyday noises of life, bicycle bells, the sound of his dogs barking, even the percussive thud of an empty plastic water cooler bottle. Seriously.
So all this crazy experimentation, it wasn't just for show. It was all serving this incredibly powerful theme. Pet Sounds is really one of rock's first true concept albums. It charts this emotional journey, right? From the hopeful, wide-eyed optimism of wouldn't it be nice, dreaming about the future, all the way to the absolute heartbreaking loss of innocence in Caroline No. It's this deeply personal, almost sad story about the anxiety of growing up.
So you have these 2 groundbreaking albums, right? Released just 5 months apart, but their fates, right when they came out, could not have been more different.
This is a tale of two very, very different receptions, and they were split right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
The difference in how these albums were received was just staggering. I mean, look at the chart positions. Rubber Soul shot straight to #1 in both the US and the UK, no problem. But Pet Sounds, it stalled out at number 10 in America. The reception there was just lukewarm and confused. But in the UK, it was hailed as a work of absolute genius, hitting #2 on the charts.
And the commercial reality was just as stark. Worldwide, Rubber Soul has sold over 16 million copies. Pet Sounds? Less than half of that. So back in 1966, there was really no contest. Rubber Soul was an absolute commercial juggernaut.
So why the huge difference? Well, in the US, the Beach Boys' own label Capitol Records was just baffled by Pet Sounds. They had no idea how to market it. And incredibly, they released a greatest hits album just 2 months later, which basically killed any momentum Pet Sounds had. But over in the UK, this brilliant PR campaign framed Brian Wilson as this reclusive, tortured musical genius. And the British press and all the musicians, including the Beatles, they completely ate it up. The story around the album became almost as important as the music itself.
But of course, the story doesn't end there. The initial sales numbers and chart positions are just one part of the legacy. The most important thing that came out of this duel was the echo it created. An echo that just kept pushing music forward for years and years.
This rivalry created this incredible echo chamber of inspiration. Think about it. First, the Beatles released Rubber Soul, which totally inspires Brian Wilson. Then, Wilson fires back with his masterpiece, Pet Sounds. And the final echo? The Beatles, completely blown away by Pet Sounds, go on to create their next masterpiece, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It became this creative arms race where the only real winner was the music itself.
So when you boil it all down, these two albums left us with distinct but equally powerful legacies. Rubber Soul proved that a pop band could make serious, introspective art that could grow up right alongside its audience. Pet Sounds, on the other hand, fundamentally changed how records were made. It truly established the studio as its own instrument and the producer as the main artist, a model that would go on to shape music for decades. Which brings us to the final question. I mean, if you were looking at it in 1966, Rubber Soul was the clear winner, no doubt. But history, well, history has been much kinder to Pet Sounds. It's now often called the greater artistic achievement. But maybe asking who won is kind of missing the point. Perhaps the real triumph was the duel itself, that incredible, cross-pollinating inspiration that pushed two brilliant artists to their absolute limits and in the process gave all of us a whole new frontier for music.